The Capital Confidential podcast is brought to you by the Times-Union, the leading newspaper in New York's capital region. Subscribe today or visit online at timesunion.com.
So I have the leader. Let me conference you in. Hold on. If I lose you, I'll call you right back.
You want to deport an undocumented person? Start with me, because I'm an undocumented person.
How do we beat him in an election? We will. I'm going to run against him. I wish you would. I wish you would, Dad. I would.
There are things in here that are unobjectionable because they're not that effective. So yeah, sure, I'll vote for a distinctive license plate. Sure, why not?
Jim, you had your press conference at 4 o'clock.
You're having a press conference now?
That's
You're
right.
talking?
I'm having a press conference.
Well, is this your space here or is it public?
No, it's my space.
Oh, this is your
Don't
space.
interrupt.
Okay.
I'm David Lombardo, and you're listening to the Capital Confidential podcast. The episode you're about to hear features incoming Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who spoke with Times-Union reporter Rachel Silberstein. You can find Rachel's deep dive into the leader's personal and political background at timesunion.com. I recommend it. I hope you enjoy this break from my voice and enjoy the show.
So I guess we'll start at the beginning. Like, tell me how you got involved in politics.
At the beginning. It was just, I was just helping a friend, actually. She was running to become the first African-American woman who would serve on the city council in Yonkers. And I was waiting to get a teaching job at the time. But I'd had a great deal of experience and been in sales and marketing and journalism, and she needed some help. So I helped her with her policy, and I helped her with speech writing. And in Yonkers, it was also during the desegregation period, and this was in the late 80s, early 90s, and there was a mayoral race that was happening at the same time, and central to the race was complying with the desegregation order or not. There were 3 candidates for mayor. 2 did not want to comply. 1 was willing to comply. So in the course of, so I had been involved because my children were school age at the time, and I was already involved with a number of different organizations that obviously were looking towards desegregation, but in a way that would not, negatively impact, our kids. And we wanted to make sure that, things were safe for them as we advocated for the desegregation of the city. So this was the backdrop. And after my friend won the primary, then I was able to help the person who would be mayor and the person who would be city council person. They all won. And when the mayor started staffing up, he asked me to join his administration as the director of community affairs, which is what I did. So that was how I got into it. And it was there, as I often say, that I realized that government impacts lives in so many ways. Mm-hmm. I realized that government could either create barriers or it could remove barriers.
And amazingly, it brought you to this moment where you're shattering glass ceilings.
Exactly, because I do believe in removing barriers to people's potential, and I'm not afraid to take the risk when it comes to, making sure people are able to reach their full potential, no matter who you are.
Speaking of being a trailblazer, why do you think that women are so underrepresented in government still today in 2018, and what advice do you give young women who are entering politics?
Well, I think more and more, especially after the 2016 election, women have, I believe, awakened to their political power, to their voices being necessary, a necessary component in public policy, and the same work that women generally do in their communities, in their churches, their synagogues, their mosques, their PTAs, the same energy that women use to create their lives and the family's lives, the same energy, if you put it into politics and public policy, actually yields fruit. And I think now more than ever, people are realizing that if they don't become involved, then the America that we thought we were all believing in, the opportunities that people have assumed would be there, can evaporate if people are not willing to take a stand and have their voices heard. So I see a great, surge of women being involved and doing the work. And I certainly think this last election, showed. My conference is going to begin in January with 14 women in it.
Yeah.
14. So, it's truly amazing. I think it is the most any conference, certainly in the Senate, has ever had.
Being in politics can be kind of, the spotlight can be kind of unforgiving. And you've probably watched,
yes.
having been in politics for so long, how it's evolved and become more friendly to women. Can you talk about some of those challenges early on in your career?
Yeah. Quite honestly, I think that the spotlight could be harsh if the spotlight ever found you. What I found as a woman, and certainly as a woman of color in politics for a very, very long time, people were not even paying attention to what I was doing or what other women like me were doing. We just weren't part of the conversation. And it boggled my mind. I used to be very, very frustrated about the fact that no matter what, and they had some landmark legislation, for example, in Westchester County, and it was so hard for them to write a story about the fight that I had to create the Human Rights Commission and so on and so forth. The coverage of women in color, of color just was not there. So now, of course, you get to the point where certainly women are scrutinized. They're scrutinized in ways that men would not be scrutinized, whether it's their hair or their clothing or whatever. And I think we've seen it very, very recently with the new Congresswoman, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, somebody talking about her shoes or her coat or whatever. So, I think women are still being subjected to certain standards that their male counterparts are not. And the advice that I would give to any woman, and that was your earlier question, who wants to get into this, to make sure they know themselves. Know yourself. That is the key piece, and have confidence in yourself. And know that you have something to bring to the table, and be willing to fight for your opportunity to bring that to the table. And know that people will criticize you, and know that people will probably tell you, somebody's going to tell you can't do it or it's impossible. But if you actually believe in what you're doing and you have full confidence, you will, even if you lose, you won't lose, because you meet people, you learn so much about people's lives, you understand the needs of people, and it is a character building exercise. So I would say to any woman, if you're interested in doing it, do it, but don't think that you won't be overly scrutinized or under-reported or whatever, but do it anyway. Do it anyway. Do it because it's a bigger purpose.
So speaking of making the legislature more female-friendly, there's former aides have been calling for, and I know you signed on to a letter calling for hearings on sexual harassment. Do you anticipate that those will happen this year? Presumably you wouldn't need the Assembly or the governor's approval to hold such hearings. Right.
I would think that there would be further conversation about sexual harassment. And I think, as you said, I did sign on saying that we should have hearings. And, I think that we can always improve. on how we make sure that the workplace is an appropriate and good place to be. So I certainly have no problems hearing from people who have suggestions as to how we can be better.
Last year when it was passed in the budget, sort of the final product of the sexual harassment policy, it was passed in the budget. Initially it seemed like you were going to be included in those discussions, and then in the end you weren't. Were you disappointed in any way by the final product? Did you think there should have been more input from women and maybe a broader coalition?
Well, I do. I mean, I did think that I did think that at least at that juncture, I would be included, or at least have some input as to what the final product, would be. So, that was disappointing. And, I said I'm always interested in making sure that we are doing absolutely the best we can in terms of creating then an environment that is appropriate for everybody who works here. So, I was happy that we did some things, and they said if there's more to be done, I'm certainly going to push for more to be done. But I think it's very, very important for people to be well aware of the boundaries and the standards in workplaces. And I think people need to be very clear on how they report these things and to whom they report. And they also should be a little clearer as to when they would get responses. And I think those were some of the things that I would have liked to have seen a little bit stronger. But, I think, again, the moves were made. I was not included. And, I will be looking to see if there's anything more we can do to strengthen the sexual harassment law.
And then on the corruption front, you talk about restoring integrity and leading a conference with intelligence and integrity. What do you think is the source of corruption in government? Do you think that this is if overhauling the campaign finance system would go a long way, or banning outside income would mitigate conflicts of interest? What is the solution in your view?
Again, I think that the culture that has been established and it's the same thing with the sexual harassment, whether it is the people feeling that they can do certain things without ever having to be accounting for what it is that they've done, has been a culture that's been pervasive for many, many years. So I think part of this is really, yes, strengthening our campaign finance laws, closing some of the obviously like the LLC loophole. We have always, my conference has talked about banning to some extent outside income. I think we looked at the congressional model where there was a limit to how much outside income you could have, and obviously I think it's very, very important that people really understand that when they enter into public service, they're in a job which requires the public to trust that we will be good stewards of their resources. And it is an obligation. It is frankly a sacred obligation. And that anything less will not be tolerated. So whether it's disclosure, obviously conflicts of income, there's all conflicts of interest, rather, there's all kinds of things that have led over the years to things happening. But, it will be our job to reestablish the public trust and do the kinds of reforms that will help the public to regain that trust in us.
Going back to your time as a journalist before getting into politics, journalists and politicians. Sometimes it gets a little bit contentious there. How has your experience sort of informed your view of the press and how, like, engaging with the media? Do you feel like you'll have a different sort of relationship with the press than your predecessor did?
No, I have a good relationship to the extent that one has a good relationship with the press. I mean, I knew early on that the press is not supposed to necessarily be your friend. You do want the press to report objectively, and certainly that was how we were taught the press should be. They should be objective reporters, and it was part of my training. I think now, with the advent of so many different ways that one accesses media, the type of source checking that I had to do before I would actually say something is certainly not the same now. So there have been, different standards, that I had to adhere to that people generally are not having to adhere to. And so people are getting their information in many, many ways. So I said I will always appreciate the press. I feel that it is an important part of maintaining our democracy. You'll never hear me say that the press is an enemy of the people, and I always, obviously would like the press to do their homework before they, say things. And, I know with this type of environment where everybody's, you've got, people, you've got blogs, this and that, people, just need to get the story out a lot of times. But, I always expect a level of responsibility from the press. And quite frankly, in the interactions I've had while I've been in this position, I found the press to be, they've done their job.
So I guess the frustrating thing...
You have done your job.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess the frustrating thing for us a lot, especially around budget time, is that we're waiting outside the door for like some snippets of conversation, right. And we don't get a lot of insight into sort of the negotiations behind closed doors and what was traded for what and how these groundbreaking pieces of legislation get passed. And it's very hard to parse that and share that with the public. Do you hope that there will be more openness and transparency in future budget negotiations? As a former member of the media who understands the role.
I know. I do understand the role. And I also understand how, frustrating it could be when you don't get the information. As I said, I'm going to be walking into this room, the proverbial room, for the first time. So I have no idea what goes on there. So I can't
in the dark
give you
as the
any
rest
help
of us.
in that. Exactly, I don't know. So I don't know.
Can you talk about your experience in Yonkers and in the Westchester legislature? Like, did that similar did that prepare you for this role in terms of building consensus and, having a very diverse conference and a very large conference? Can you talk about what politics is like there for those of us who haven't lived there?
Yeah, well, it was not like not like Albany at all. It was not bicameral. It was just one simple majority. In order to get legislation passed, it was a 17-member board, and in order to get legislation passed, you simply had to have 9 people agree with you.
Oh wow!
And so it was, in that respect, it was a lot easier. However, I was the chair of legislation for 6 years and had an opportunity, as I said, to be the author and sponsor of Westchester County's human rights laws. And that was what I thought was kind of a no-brainer. I just wondered where people who in a county with 1 million people approximately, where would one go if one had a situation that, was discriminatory. And the reason why I was asking the question is because there was a major corporation that had been sued by their black employees because of incidents that had happened there. There were SWAT stickers appearing on synagogues in Manhattan, in Mamaroneck, in Scarsdale. And so I just asked the question, where do you go? And it turned out that people were going to the State Human Rights Commission, and it also turned out that they were waiting years and years and years to get their cases heard. So I thought it would be, incumbent upon us, frankly, with a county this large, you would be able to go and appeal directly to the county. And first it was a problem, no, we don't need to do that. This is Westchester and there's no discrimination. But the most interesting thing at that time was when the LGBTQ community said, what about us? There's no protections for us. And so then I was faced with the dilemma of, because I was not coming from that perspective. I was coming from the perspective of I was looking at the religious discrimination. I'm a woman, I'm an African-American woman, so I had my own perspective of it. But when the gay community came forward and we started having a conversation around then, the opposition was just really, it was shocking. And so we spent 2 years building consensus and building a movement, frankly, which served me when I did run for higher office, because so many people had become involved in the fight to make sure that we would establish a commission that didn't discriminate against people, because of their sexual orientation. So it was a fight, and, former Senator George Latimer was the chair of the county board, and I was the legislative chair at the time, and it was a tremendous push, and I said it took 2 years, and basically we were able to pass the human rights legislation, which led to the commission, which at that time was the most progressive because, it did indeed cover people's sexual orientation. And later, Governor Pataki passed a similar bill and came to Westchester to sign the bill.
It's amazing that the Human Rights Commission was controversial in the 90s.
Exactly. Precisely. Because, I'm telling you, we're talking about desegregation in Yonkers in 1992. As if people assume a lot. We really do. And we take a lot for granted. And like I said, I didn't think it was controversial when I asked the question, like, where do you go? And when there was no answer, I said, well, we need to create an answer. Let's do it. And I'm telling you, if you were to look back to the archives, you would be amazed. It was a huge, huge controversy that went on for 2 years. I think, I want to think that, because I entered the legislature in 96. I want to think the legislation was signed in 1999. But, but I did learn a lot about consensus building, about the power of people, ordinary people, which I've had reinforced over and over again in my political career. I've run against incumbents. I've run against the status quo. And, what I found is that if you have an idea and the time for that idea has come, you said if you have the perseverance and the stamina, to fight for that idea and to engage other people in the fight, you can definitely win. And so my career has been a study in that as well. So I like to think in many ways that it's an inspiration for some people, because, there was absolutely, I wasn't thinking of ever being a politician. I didn't even speak in public for most of my life. I was really very phobic about it. So, the thing is, whoever you start out to be, you don't have to necessarily, you shouldn't stay that way, really. You should be evolving and growing and taking on challenges. Education is really, really, really very important. A support system. I have a wonderful family and faith in yourself. And, I mean, there's a lot of ingredients, but the thing is that look at things outside of yourself, and how can you make something better after you've touched it.
How do you prepare for a role like this, leadership, and basically having? Is there a way to prepare?
Probably what I told you. You just have to be willing to take on challenges.
Do you feel like your freedom to speak freely about your views and about the way you were able to in the minority party, do you feel like you still have that freedom, or you have to be more political and diplomatic and safer, careful?
No, I've always been diplomatic. Again, I was a journalist. I mean, I choose my words carefully. Mm-hmm. I pay attention to what people say. I enjoy listening to people. I like to, explain things in ways that people understand. There'll be more responsibility because we will be, part of the leadership of this great state. And, I take that responsibility very seriously, as do all of my members. So I don't see any shift in my ability to say what I think. But I've always paid attention to what I say, because I know words matter. Mm-hmm. Again, I choose my words carefully because I believe that they do matter.
Okay, and I know you got to get off the phone, so I just wanted to ask about, Senate I think you already said Senate resources will stay the same, right? Even though they're a smaller minority.
Right.
Okay.
Well, the percentage is the way. Yeah. I mean, yes, the percentage would stay the same.
Okay. And in terms of, being more inclusive, allowing, bills to move through the legislature, allowing people in minority to have more of a say of the agenda or what gets considered.
Well, I will let you know, frankly, that the only reason that there is inclusivity now is because the last time Democrats took the majority, we started to allow Republicans to get bills on the floor. If you recall, and when I ran, and one of the motivators for me to run was the Brennan Center's report in 2004, which said that the New York State legislature was among the most dysfunctional in the nation. And part of that was because of the lack of transparency, the lack of inclusivity. In other words, if you weren't Republican, you had no chance of getting your bills on the floor. The only way they got on the floor is if some Republican replaced your name so that it could come as a Republican, I guess. So we opened it up in that way, and we also started allowing our colleagues to be able to put those on the floor. That will happen. I am looking for a, collegial atmosphere with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I think a lot of that work gets done member to member. And, I don't believe that only one party has good ideas, but I do believe that, people have different views. And, I'm, again, happy that we will be in a position where, some of our policy initiatives will be able to come forward.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Nice talking to you. Oh, you worked me hard.